I will give one more welcome to those of you who have joined since the beginning. Uh, we are here from lots of different places, and tonight we are going to be hearing from Pastor Candice Combs and Alycia Ashburn about the spirituality in nature groups and the Wild Church networks and different ways that we can connect our faith with the land where we are. Tonight, our goal will not be to teach specific liturgies from the spirituality and nature groups or Wild Church or do any season of creation specific worship, but rather to start exploring what it is our wild, curious people and our wild leadership people together. So this is a time for connection and curiosity, and we have two wonderful leaders who are going to take us through that. So right now, I'm going to pass it over to Pastor Candice and let you talk a little bit about your experience in the Wild Church.
Hi, everyone. I'm Candice Combs, and I wanted to let you know that Alycia and I met at the Multiply Conference earlier this spring. We had no idea that each other existed or that there were other Lutherans going into the conference that were committed to spirituality and nature. And I was so delighted and kind of transformed in knowing that Alycia and I share so much spirituality in common that the idea was born to help all of the Lutherans interested in spirituality and nature come together. And so our presentations tonight are really to help you get a glimpse of what this looks like in Ohio and Texas, and to just start to imagine what it might be like to partner with some of the people on this call. Uh, so let's see. I am an ELCA Lutheran, but my training was really very interfaith and interdenominational. I went to my local seminary and got my Lutheran year at Luther Seminary, and I was called to New Life Lutheran, which was already practicing outside just during the pandemic when we were getting our vaccines. And so this picture shows what it looks like on a typical Sunday when I preach in the middle of the summer. And they've put a couple of typical Lutheran things in our worship area that help us feel connected to the land. Everyone wants to know what it looks like when we worship outside. So this congregation has 12 acres that were purchased by the Mission Investment Fund, and one thing led to another, and it became financially impossible to put a building on this land. And so they got creative. The first thing that people always ask me is, what do you do when it rains? The simple answer is that we have a partnership with an Episcopal church in town for bad weather Sundays. But the reality of climate change is that in the last 5 years, we've gone from having 8 Sundays inside to 4 Sundays inside to only having 1 Sunday inside. And even though we are in a fairly green part of Texas, we have only had 2 rainy Sundays in almost 6 years. We notice that climate change is happening. So as you're looking at this picture, I just want to point out to you the pulpit on the far left. We get all of our electricity through a battery and solar generation. We have musicians, we have read hymnals, and we have a giant sacred tree that about 150 people could sit under, though we're usually 45 to 65. This big tree is so big that if I went to go give this tree a hug, it would take 3 of us to get our arms wrapped around. It is a fairly sacred being on our land, and it's the first thing you see when you come out of the parking lot to come to worship. We've made a few improvements because it is our land. You'll see a shed that we're quite proud of. We've moved from a donated trailer to a fairly roomy shed. And you'll see a sidewalk there on the bottom of the screen that leads to a patio for people who are impaired or need strollers, anyone who needs wheels to come to worship. When I say wild church, people think of that childhood story where the wild things are, and they think we act like monsters and drum and dance around. So it's really helpful if I tell them that there's synonyms for wild, like organic and natural, and our favorite, in and with nature. We're kind of like the untamed Lutherans. The Wild Church is a network of churches. It's different from the group that Alycia is going to be talking about, but shares a lot in common. I was surprised that after our church was part of the initial 8 churches in North America, it has quickly blossomed in the last 10 years to over 250 churches in North America and Europe. And the thing that really unites the Wild Church network is not a liturgy or a denomination. There are, in fact, atheists and Buddhists and Methodists and Presbyterians and Episcopalians that have all identified as Wild Church. It's the practice of Terra Divina that unites us, and I will explain that more in a minute. I want to read this quote to you that I think really exemplifies our calling. You might have heard it before. I used to think that the top global environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation, and we scientists don't know how to do that. So it has never been more clear to me that the church is being called to help people not only with climate change, but specifically selfishness, greed, and apathy. These are the things that are really holding us back to being able to secure a future for our offspring and our grandchildren. I have a few quotes from you for you about what my people say about what it's like to be outside. Experiencing worship outdoors helps me see New Life, our church, as a vibrant community of remarkable people rather than just a physical structure. I often find myself marveling at the stunning beauty of the trees, flowers, birds, and other creatures we share this space with, feeling deeply humbled by God's incredible creation. And so that's Adam taking communion with someone else's dog. And that's Talene, who later became a seminary intern, and she's on her internship right now. Communion is for everyone, including the creatures that we bring to church. Here we had a visitor for a good long time, Deacon Abel Stewart, who was driving an hour and a half each way from San Antonio to study us for his own congregation. God is always bigger and more creative than our human systems can grasp. When we step outside our buildings and encounter the covenanting God of the wilderness, we cannot not be changed. The Wild Church Network doesn't just look like Lutherans sitting under a tree. It looks like groups of people who want to be outside, playing drums, holding hands, singing and praying with trees, sitting in circles, playing in the water. You can't do it wrong. It's just people who are curious to restore a sacred relationship with creation. I'm not going to be teaching about Terra Divina, but if you're curious about what it is, you read this from left to right, top to bottom, and it's 6 stages of sacred engagement with the spirit and with nature. You might have heard of contemplative prayer before centering prayer, or Lectio Divina or Visio Divina. Terra Divina uses nature as the sacred text, and it helps you engage with the Holy Spirit and the voice of the Spirit of creation, and then coming back together to see what you discern. The key part about Terra Divina is when the community comes back from their wander and they have a conversation about what God is saying to them, kind of like a Bible study or a medium-sized teaching group. There's a facilitator that makes sure it's a safe space, but you'll find that in the wild, people go safe and deep a lot faster than they do in a building. That's the introduction that I have for you for Wild Church. And now I'm going to turn it over to Alycia so that you can see another way of doing spirituality in nature.
Thanks, Gabrielle, for doing my slides. Hey, everyone. Is it coming up? I'll start because it's mostly just pictures. My name is Alycia Ashburn. Hello to some of you that I already know. It's really great to see your names and your faces on here. And I've been doing nonprofit work at this intersection of faith and the environment for pretty much my entire adult life, which is a few decades now. And that has included at multiple chapters of Interfaith Power and Light groups, Lutherans Restoring Creation in its beginning stages, its baby stages, the nonprofit Sojourners, And I'm also a former board president of the Center for Spirituality and Nature, which I'm going to tell you a little bit about. If you already know, I'm sorry, I'm telling you something you already know about. I can't wait to hear from you and how you've experienced it later in our call today. Slide 2, please, if you.
We're having a little bit of technical difficulties, but I will get them up as soon as I can.
Yeah, don't worry about it. The center is a national organization that started in Northern Virginia in 2014. I was living there in 2012 and 2013 working at Sojourners, and I was kind of a guinea pig for the woman that started it. I was part of her initial group that started meeting for 3 hours a couple of Saturdays a month, wandering around in the woods near the Potomac River. And later, we blossomed into this organization, and the center's programs, let's see, are you able to, let's do, which slide is that? Yeah, go back. Go to the second one. I'm glad you're doing it, not me. They really integrate into our daily lives more mindfulness and attentiveness to the divine in nature. So the programs are designed to reconnect us with and live into our deeply rooted relationship with our earth community and with the divine spirit that enlivens it. A few programs include webinars on the spiritual wisdom of trees, a Monday meditations, which is like a communal nature-based meditation reflections led by Reverend Peyton Ho out of his home in California. It's all online. There's a women's deep slowing backpacking trip every May and September, which is phenomenal. Still have a couple spots left for the one coming up this September in Pennsylvania. Mindful art mini retreats. And then the original program, really the one I just mentioned that I started out with in Northern Virginia, is called the Spirituality and Nature Group. And we call them SINGs for short. And we say, come sing with us. And they're just spiritual communities that meet sometimes weekly, sometimes monthly. If you're with me, it's usually seasonally in nature to just engage the wisdom that nature has to offer. Sometimes we connect to the liturgical season, sometimes we don't based on who's with us, and really reawaken that wonder and that connection and that renewed commitment to our relationship with the earth. They provide opportunities to broaden our understanding of our local ecosystems, to just delight in what's happening seasonally, and then, of course, to deepen our relationship with spirit and with one another. Can you go to the next one, if it'll let you? So there's just some examples of when we meet here in the suburbs of Cleveland. And the middle there is an announcement of just one of the ones I did last year with my colleague, Nikki. So on the slides tonight, you're going to see photos from the Sing that we have here in Northeast Ohio, but each one is really, truly unique. And there's over 50 in 27 different states. And the website has a map and you can click on them. And they go by many names, and they're really shaped by their community members in relationship to the local ecosystem. Some are small groups, some are large groups, some are connected to a congregation or a faith tradition, some to no religion at all. Some groups hike on rocky wilderness trails, some of us walk mindfully in parks or forests, and some of us have even used kayaking as a way to meet together as a community. Many of us involve poetry, breathing practices, scripture. Some of us have done youth or kids-specific experiences. But really, they're not just another nature walk. I am not out there leading a guided hike about the local ecosystem like our Metro Parks rangers are. These are very distinctly slow and spiritual and intentional. And we invite participants into practices that are designed to help us be present in the moment and really notice what spirit is doing in creation and among all of us. Next slide, please, Gabrielle. So a little bit more about the one here in Northeast Ohio with my friend and fellow church member, Nikki Mona. She's in the upper right corner there, peeking through the leaf. We meet at a regional park and spend 2 to 3 hours together, and we meet 3 to 4 times a year. And we would do it more. We love these people. People want more, but that's just what we can commit to as busy local lay people. Sings are open to all. They're really strengthened by the diversity of their membership. Oftentimes they're very intergenerational. Sometimes they're racially and religiously diverse. And the leadership is often by lay people, sometimes clergy, but the guides and the resources, and I have a couple here to show you, are all available online. And they're really designed to make it easy for anyone to gather folks and start a sing group. And when Candice and I were in Asheville together for the Lutheran's Restoring Creation Conference, there was a young woman from Alexandria, Virginia, and she'd been thinking about something like this, but she wasn't sure what it was. And we did some practices together there. And then now she and her colleague have started a sing group out of their Lutheran church in Alexandria, which is really great. And next slide, please. I can tell you more about this stuff later, but another little thing I've done is this wonderful book, Discovering the Spiritual Wisdom of Trees, was written by the founder of the center, Beth Norcross, and Leah Rampey, who is a member both of a WildChurch and a local sing group. And I've done book studies now with this book twice, weekly for 6 weeks, and it's been wonderful. It just led our congregation. There were 26 people participating this spring, and then Leah came and did a lecture for us. And I'm really happy to share what I did and anything that I can help with if anyone wants to do that. It's pretty simple. And then next slide. Well, Candice and Gabrielle and I were putting this call together for tonight. Phoebe, our fearless LRC director, and the director of the Center for Spirituality and Nature, Heidi, were putting together an announcement that we will be holding a training for anyone who does want to be a sing leader. This is specifically for Lutherans Restoring Creation, and it'll be on October 24th, and we would love to have you. And that's it for now.
Thank you so much, Alycia. And thanks, Candice, too, and thanks, everybody, for your patience as we work through some technical things. We're now going to enter our Q&A section of the evening, and by that, I mean Q&A for you, as well as the our two wonderful facilitators, Alycia and Candice. So right now, we are going to break into triads, and we have 2 questions to discuss, to do like a little bit of this practice of connecting with your relationship to land. Those 2 questions are: what ecosystems formed you? And that's ecosystems pretty broadly: beaches, forests, urban parks. And what is one of your earliest connections to nature? Actually, I want every room, every triad, to share something that they heard. Feel free to do that in the chat, but I would love if somebody would be willing to come off mute and just talk a little bit about what you think needs to be shared with the group from what you heard in your triad. Go ahead, Pastor Shannon.
Yeah, it was such a neat question, especially because in our group, we had someone from the East Coast, the West Coast, and from St. Louis right in the center. And so talking about some of the different places of where we grew up and how that impacted, and also like thinking about the now and how those 2 different things, because they can be different. And so, someone talked about Holden, and somebody talked about, the places that they grew up, and the memories and the smells and the things that go along with that. And for me, like growing up, we camped a lot as kids, just because it was, cheap to take kids camping. That was the right way to start it. And so I grew up in Wisconsin. And so I remember camping and remember the friends and remember meeting kids at the campsites and all of that. But, we were talking a little bit about the Psalms too, and Psalm 121. And I lift my eyes to the hills. And what does that mean, whether when you're on hikes or whether when you're in areas where you live at that are flat, and how that still impacts, and how even the different terrains can have meaning, and that hills look different ways, and that the geography can look differently and still hold this deep meaning. So when I say I look to the hills, what does that actually mean for each of us? But I would, for me, the ecosystem. So like I said, I grew up in Wisconsin with that, but the ecosystem that really formed me, that I shared with the group, is the mountains. I moved to Seattle 10 years ago from the Midwest, and it's very different. And I've just fallen in love with the mountains. It's the place that I'm whole, and it's the place that I feel well connected, the place where I find Sabbath. But it's also a place that shaped who I am now as a pastor and as a person, and as just every bit of my being. Alycia knows this, but 5 years ago, my husband died in a mountain climbing accident. And it was in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, which means blood of Christ. And my bishop was with me when we found out about all of this. And I remember crying and saying, did he suffer? And she held my head and said, I promise you, he didn't suffer. He fell into Christ. And so this idea of what our baptismal promises mean in the midst of nature, and in the midst of nature doesn't care if you live or die, but God does. And how we find that deep impact in the midst of it, and how that shapes us into who we are with our understanding of these baptismal promises and these understandings of what it means to be God with us, and where our spirituality is formed, and where we can talk to our loved ones, past and present, and where we can experience our own wholeness in places that are quiet and that feed us and that bring back memories and all sorts of stuff. So I love those questions of the ecosystem that has actually shaped us, because I think we sometimes forget about that.
Thank you so much, Shannon, for sharing.
When you were sharing, your whole face lit up like with an embodied memory of childhood delight and deep connection. And I thank you for sharing that.
Thanks. Yeah, I volunteer for a group called Wild Grief now that works with teenagers and young adults who process their grief outdoors. And we take them camping for 4 days in the backcountry, because we go outside, we go through it together. That's a place that's holy. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. Thank you for sharing, Shannon. It sounds like you got really far and deep in 15 minutes, even just not even being in a naturey place, but just to bring it up in your group's memory. I see that Sarah G said her group talked about connections to parks, campings, and bodies of water. Candice, you shared that birds and foxes were part of your group's discussion. And I also saw farm, and I really appreciate that. I live on a farm, so thanks for sharing that, Lynn. Thank you, everybody, for sharing all of this. It can really touch a deep part inside of us, and that can be vulnerable. So I just appreciate everybody going there with us tonight. And right now, I'm actually going to turn our questions towards Candice and Alycia. So we have experienced a little bit of the kind of discussion that can be facilitated tonight. And we've heard from Candice, who runs a WildChurch, and Alycia, who facilitates a spirituality and nature group. So you are free to put any questions for them in the chat that they might be able to answer. And to get us started, I'm going to start with a question for the two of you. And I'm going to go, it's really big. What do you think that God is doing in nature?
God's doing a lot in nature, with nature, I think. I wanted to bring up two answers to this. The first is that these are based on my impressions. The first is that our modern world is so much more stressful on our bodies. Pollution and screens and processed foods, and all the things that are physically stressful on your body. And I just feel like the way we have been doing church for like the last 500 years, it's time for something new to happen. God is trying to heal us and reconnect us to nature. Um, we see in our experiences this undescribable, mysterious, I just feel better after being in nature. And the other thing that I think is really important is that as our churches internationally are shrinking, the institutional churches, I think that there's not enough pastoral care, spiritual care for people. And so God is raising up lay leaders to help people connect to nature so that we everyday average people can help people connect to the healing that God intends for us, especially for people who are unwilling to go to an institution to seek guidance and healing. But I know Alycia has other good impressions of what God's been doing.
Yeah, my experience here, I waited a while after moving to Cleveland. I really wanted to start a sing group right away, having experienced the one that Beth started along the Potomac in DC. But the work I was doing at the time, which was a lot of climate justice and racial justice work with Ohio Interfaith Power and Light, I knew if I started it by myself, I would end up with a lot of other people that looked just like me, if that makes sense. I knew I needed a partner to better represent the diversity that is the greater Cleveland area and humanity in general. And so my husband is an ordained ELCA Lutheran pastor and a Navy chaplain. But he's currently at a Presbyterian church 1 block from our house. It's where our kids went to preschool. Because, the future is ecumenical and more, and the future is also outside. And so one of his colleagues said, could you just do a Lenten walk outside somewhere? And she knew I had this kind of banging around in my head for a long time. And I said, sure, thank you for getting me going. And there was somebody who kept showing up to our Earth Care meetings, Nikki from the choir, and I just took a long shot and said, you have a very different background than I do, more of like international development and relief work and development work. And I said, would you, she's from Zimbabwe, would you please be my co-facilitator? And, she thought about it a little bit, prayed about it, and said, yeah. And so one of the things I love the most about our group is that, and I see God at work here, is that we're actually very racially diverse and age-wise, we're very diverse. There's a couple of young girls who, I call them young girls because they're so young compared to me, but they're probably like around age 30. They're always there. Sometimes they make lemonade and bring it along. And then there's a woman named Ethel from the choir who's 90 and in the best shape. She's in better shape than I am. So just a really huge span. We joke sometimes about how not enough men show up. And then the men say, well, they're just not as evolved. No offense to any of the men on this call, but that's a man who says that, the head of our Earth Care team. Anyway, it's just been this wonderful, and it changes from week to week. And the Lutherans come and the Episcopalians come. We're working on inviting our Jewish and Muslim colleagues to kind of garner more support for the local IGA, Interfaith Group Against Hate. I'm trying to connect with some leaders who do nature-y things in those congregations that we could lead a walk together. Nikki and I try and make it a place where folks who've been hurt by church still feel safe with us. And so far we think that's been true. So God's doing a lot relationship-wise, also kind of grounding us in and hope and restoration, and just why we believe in God and go to church in the first place, but also just this this relational stuff. Also, Candice, I know you touched on this when we talked beforehand, but there's this vulnerability that occurs that Candice and I have talked about a lot, that I think it takes longer when you're inside, but when you're outside, it doesn't take long at all. And people we open up to each other more, especially when you literally walk alongside one another and notice God's spectacular creation. So we're more authentically ourselves. And I think in that way, it makes us, well, Candice, you said this the other day, it makes us more open to love, and in every sense, love of one another, love of God, love of creatures. And so there's just so much going on. It's just beautiful.
Yeah, well said, Alycia. Yeah, one of our guests said to us, one of our guest visitors had said, the weather makes you more vulnerable, and the vulnerability makes you more open to love. And so, just to amplify some of the things you were saying, Alycia, the way that things happen faster, for any of you who are feeling really challenged and called and uncertain, I would go so far as to say your spiritual gifts will develop even faster outside. There's Francis Weller is a fan of talking about our Stone Age bodies, that we never really kept evolving once we started living in communities of about 40 people. And so there's a part of our humanity, of our biological humanity, that wants to be seen by about 40 pairs of eyes every day. Some of you who are introverts will say, no, I think it's like 2. And some of you who are extroverts will be more like 100. But he likes to say 40. I could work at the mall and would be delighted with 1,000 people. But we are meant to live in community and reciprocity with other humans and nature. And so our relationships with each other as Christians, but also as earthlings, are written into us by our Creator and the systems that have developed our bodies. When we shut ourselves off in this modern living and limit our interaction to screens, it has a really profound and isolating effect that I think that the earth is inviting us to get back out there to it.
I hear from both of you something that's really interesting, which is I think oftentimes we have this model of like going into the wilderness. Like we often call upon the story of Jesus going into the wild to like be alone and to reset. But what I hear that's different in both of your stories is this like this part of the wild that makes it very easy and open to other human relationships. It's not just about our relationship with the land or the earth, that it also opens us up in that way too.
Yeah. Yeah. And as I've had to learn how to preach to people who want to only be outside together, I've learned that as our sacred stories were written down in the development of the Bible, it was written down by people who were developing an agricultural storage village. And so to them, it was just obvious how God was outside. And so they captured the stories of how to live in a village together or in a city. There's just ways in which the sacred text has to be like read between the lines in order to see our calling back to nature.
Gabrielle, I see a question from Pastor Shannon. How do you balance for different abilities and interests while keeping it enjoyable and engaging for everyone? That's a really good question. I worried a lot about this at first because I thought we would get a lot of nature lovers who are used to doing some like heavy exercising. And I'm like, they're going to be disappointed. Like this is slow. So we were just really open about what to expect. And so even my people who I do see exercise outside a lot, they know when we're together on a Sunday afternoon in late September that that's not their exercise time. This is extremely different. And then usually we'll do like an intro, we'll do a land acknowledgement, and we'll do an acknowledgement of this, of not only who's lived there, but what has happened to this land over the years. And then we'll walk a little bit, and then we'll invite people into a practice, and then we'll walk a little bit more. When I say a practice, there's so many different kinds. It can be, like what Candice described as Terra Divina. We call it Lectio Divina in nature. It's basically the same thing. It can be, and then we'll walk a little more, and then we'll invite somebody into different practice, and people can really do as much or as little as they want. Sometimes I have folks who go off and at that moment, they just really need to journal or take pictures, and they don't want to do the invitation, and that's fine. That's totally fine. There's a senses one that you turn off all your other senses, and then you focus on just one, and you get in little groups like we did on our call. That is a hit, not just with the kids, but adults love it so much too. And, there's reflections on poetry. And I think my favorite is that, we live near Cleveland Clinic. We live near Case Western University. There's tons of retired biology professors and pastors and, people who have PhDs and I don't know what. And so I just find that I don't have to know it all or be it all. I'm really just sort of this facilitator. And then what happens in the discussion is really where the Holy Spirit is and what happens in nature when we're meeting together. It's very freeing. I still do prep work, but the more often I do this, the less I have to do.
Yeah, I have two things to bring to that. It's going to be challenging to hear this, but I practice that wild church is not for everyone. And that's because we have a lot of people in our culture who live their entire day inside in treated air. They need medications that make it difficult to be out in the heat or out in the cold. And so, of course, we're trying to make ourselves accessible for everyone. We have, ramps and sidewalks. Not everyone likes this kind of work. They've already found God in their way, and that can be really freeing. However, in order to make it accessible to everyone who is in my community, we practice free range children, which means that children can get up and move around because some bodies learn kinesthetically. And we have both a children's playground. You'll be familiar with that. And we also have a literal playground about 100 kid paces behind the altar. And they move back and forth through the worship as they like to. I would also really like to get rid of our red hymnals, but that is a way that I make it accessible for everyone in my community. And we only open it once each Sunday, but I also have a traditional pianist, and that helps a lot too. Gabrielle, do we have time for one more question?
We sure do. I see that Lisa has a question specifically about the sing training, which Alycia, I might have you answer.
Our staff, I still say our because I was on that board and now I'm on the LSC board. I can say our for both. We're really, really, really used to meeting our audience's needs. If this is a Lutheran specific group, then it will be a more Christian oriented group. And I will be happy to tell Peyton and Heidi that, and they will deliver it as such. In general, the materials from the center are more open than that. And that was a very intentional, hard decision made by the center many years ago because everyone who was there at the beginning was Christian, usually mainline Protestant. But we knew so many people who'd been hurt by the church or who were even in interreligious relationships. So we wanted the resources to be more open than just Christian. My husband would call it post-denominational, and he's a pastor. So.
Thanks, Alycia.
But I'll find out more for sure. Lisa, can you send me your email address?
Sure. If I have your email address, I don't know if it's posted somewhere, I can certainly do that. My video is not working for some reason. I don't know why. Because I've ordered materials previously from the Center for Spirituality and Nature, but I find them to be, I really am looking for specifically Christian materials. So they don't really serve my purpose, unfortunately. That's why I asked the question. And I've gone through their trainings before, but again, I'm really looking for something more specifically Christian because that's the nature of the outings that I lead here in Houston.
Have you looked at Creation Justice Ministries, their materials?
I have seen their materials. I've never seen anything from them that I actually felt was something I could use on my like guided prayer walks or the other kind of things that I'm leading in nature. Now, if they have materials like that and I've somehow missed them, I would love to know about them.
Sure.
Because I've never noticed them. Although I look at a lot of stuff from Creation Justice Ministries. So sure, I'll put my email in the chat.
I think even if I just put you in touch with Peyton, he can share a lot of things with you. So
okay, that would be good because I'm always looking for resources and I find them in lots of different places, but some work better than others in my particular context, right?
And we will be sending out an email at the end of this call to everyone with any resources that Alycia and Candice that you want to share. I'm sure there was a couple books, Alycia, that you wanted to share. And we'll send that out to everybody who registered along with the recording if you missed any part of it. Looking at our time, I would like to invite Candice and Alycia once more for anything that you want to leave us with before we close.
I guess I would say please continue listening to your interest and your sense of call. There are, I think, 6 wild churches formed as Lutheran churches, like with communion and led by SAMs or clergy. That is clearly not enough to meet the needs of all the people in this country who need to be reconnected to nature. And so I really think you can't do it wrong. Just try. You'll discover your gifts as you practice. And if you are a clergy person who really wants more details, please don't hesitate to reach out. I would love to talk to like-minded clergy about this.
I wish we had more time so I could hear more from all of you about your experiences. Let's do another call, Gabrielle. Is that too much to ask? I see some heads nodding. I just want to kind of leave you with the thought too, because I'm sure you've had this experience if you're here tonight. And that is that, Gabrielle, you asked us, what's God doing? Why are relationships so important in this work? And one of the things I keep coming back to is the word liminality. This especially comes up during Lent. So this in-between time, this in-between space, whether we are in between winter and spring, whether we are in between Christmas and Easter, whether we're in between one job or another, or we have this great uncertainty, God can't be rushed. Nature will not be rushed. And so being outside in God's first word, the creation, really allows us to be present with all of the complexity of our emotions and this vulnerability with one another. And it brings up so many wonderfully deep things that really have to come up, especially in this day, this time. It's really special to be part of a community or communities where we can process this together. And for me, that's really what it's all about.
Thanks, Alycia. Seeing that we're past the hour, I will invite you to not let this be the end of the conversation, especially if you're interested in continuing the conversation. I am happy, and I think I will connect Alycia and Candice as a part of the email that you will receive. They've both told me that they're happy to receive your questions and your companionship. If you are interested in incorporating, nature, spirituality, WildChurch, spirituality and nature groups, any of that into into your calling. Thank you for putting your emails in the chat, and don't worry if you don't get them right away, because I will also send them.
Thank you,
I'm
everyone,
just gonna,
for joining us.
yes, I'm gonna close this in a very, very brief prayer, which is just to say, Creator, thank you for gathering us. Thank you for sending us to be in and with your creation. Amen.
Amen.